In the south of Denmark, a megaproject is underway to build a tunnel under the Baltic, linking the country to Germany.
Imagine a train slipping beneath the Baltic Sea, not through a mountain, but through giant concrete sections resting on the seabed itself. Above, ferries and freight still cross the old route. Below, Europe is building an 18-kilometer shortcut that could redraw trade forever. Why this tunnel matters. Okay, so before we get into the engineering, let's talk about the real question. Why would Europe spend billions to build a tunnel under the Baltic Sea when ferries already cross this route every day? Because this is not just a local shortcut. It is one of the most important missing links between Scandinavia and Central Europe. And for years, that gap has slowed both passengers and freight. The Fehmarnbelt Tunnel is designed to close that gap and become part of the Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor of the wider European transport network. Right now, if you want to cross between Rødbyhavn in Denmark and Puttgarden in Germany, you rely on the ferry. The sea crossing itself takes about 45 minutes, and that is before you count loading time, waiting time, weather delays, or the slow rhythm of port traffic. The tunnel changes that completely. Official project figures say the trip will take about 7 minutes by train and 10 minutes by car once the fixed link is in operation. And that is where the story gets bigger. This tunnel is not only about making one journey faster, it is about tightening the flow of goods between northern and continental Europe, cutting distance in a way maps do not show, but supply chains definitely feel. Project material says rail travel between Hamburg and Copenhagen could fall from about 5 hours to 2.5 hours. That is not just convenience. That is a shift in how Europe moves. When a bottleneck disappears, entire regions start breathing differently. And now comes the wild part, the way Europe plans to do it, building the seabed tunnel. Now here's where this project starts to feel almost unreal. China's tunnel story was about giant machines chewing through rock. Europe's version is different. The Fehmarnbelt Tunnel is being built from massive prefabricated concrete elements, produced on land, and then placed into a trench on the seabed. It is less like drilling through the earth, and more like assembling a hidden structure beneath the sea, piece by piece. And the scale is ridiculous in the best possible way. Official project updates say the tunnel is being built from 79 standard elements, each 217 meters long, plus 10 special elements that will contain the tunnel's electrical installations. Each standard element is made up of 9 segments, cast in an assembly line process inside huge production halls near Rødbyhavn. This is not a one-off construction site improvising every step. It is industrial manufacturing on a mega-project scale. That changes the whole feel of the project. Instead of fighting the sea with a single dramatic breakthrough, engineers are turning tunnel building into a repeatable production system. Segment after segment is cast, pushed forward for curing, checked for quality, and prepared for the next phase. Even the concrete has to be carefully controlled, because these elements are so large that the curing process can create cracks if temperatures are not managed properly. Then comes the moment when these floating giants leave the factory. Bulkheads are installed so the finished elements can stay buoyant. The basins are flooded like a lock system, and the elements are moved toward the work harbor before immersion. So this is not just a tunnel being built under the sea. It is a supply chain of concrete, steel, ballast, vessels, and precision, all moving toward one silent line on the seabed. And that raises the next question. How do you lower something this huge into place without getting it wrong? Precision placement. Now comes the part that sounds calm on paper and terrifying in real life. It is one thing to cast giant tunnel sections on land. It is another to float them out into open water, lower them into a trench on the seabed, and connect them so precisely that the whole tunnel behaves like one continuous structure. That is the real nerve of the Fehmarnbelt project. The drama here is not speed, it is alignment. The tunnel trench itself has already been dredged across the 18-kilometer route, and the official project status says that work produced almost 15 million cubic meters of soil, stone, and sand. Before any element goes down, a special vessel lays an even gravel bed, so the section has an exact surface to rest on. Then the huge element is kept afloat by specially designed immersion pontoons, guided from the work harbor toward the trench like a moving building being steered across the sea. And this is where precision becomes everything. Official project material says ballast is added and adjusted, so each element can be immersed with an accuracy of a few millimeters. Think about that for a second. These are concrete giants, more than 200 meters long, being lowered into the seabed environment with tolerances closer to watchmaking than ordinary construction. One mistake at this stage does not just slow the project down. It risks the seal, the connection, and the structural rhythm of everything that follows. Once an element is lowered into place, other specialist vessels move in. One spreads stone and gravel along the sides to lock the element into position. Another lays a protective stone layer on top. Step by step, the seafloor stops being empty water and starts becoming transport infrastructure. That is the strange beauty of this project. Europe is not drilling through a barrier here. It is quietly building a new route directly into the shape of the seabed itself. And when a process this precise has to be repeated again and again, you need more than engineers. You need an industrial machine behind it. The Megaproject machine. What makes this project feel different is that the tunnel itself is only part of the story. Around it, Europe has built an entire industrial ecosystem just to make the crossing possible. On the Danish side near Rødbyhavn, the main construction site covers an area equal to about 300 football pitches, making it the largest tunnel construction site in Europe. More than 2,000 people from over 40 countries are working there, which gives the whole project the feeling of a temporary industrial city built for one mission. At the center of that city is the tunnel factory. Official project updates say it contains 3 production halls and 5 production lines for the standard tunnel elements, with a 6th line for the special elements that will house electrical installations. Nearby, a separate panel factory handles the steel skeleton inside the concrete elements, processing thousands of tons of rebar and using both welding robots and manual finishing work. So when people imagine a tunnel under the sea, they often picture only the final crossing. In reality, this project begins as a choreography of steel grids, molds, curing concrete, ballast tanks, and quality control. Then there are the work harbors, because nothing at this scale survives on road transport alone. Official project status says a cargo vessel arrives roughly every 3rd day in Denmark and about 2 vessels a week in Germany, with most materials shipped directly to the construction sites to avoid sending thousands of heavy truck journeys across land. At peak production, the harbor in Rødbyhavn is expected to receive around 65,000 tons of stone, cement, sand, gravel, and steel every week. That is the hidden engine of the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel. Not one dramatic machine, not one heroic breakthrough, but a full industrial rhythm humming behind the scenes. And once all that effort is pointed at a single crossing, the question becomes impossible to ignore. What happens when this route starts moving people and freight at an entirely new speed? The trade impact. This is where the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel stops being a construction story and starts becoming a trade story. On the surface, it looks like a faster crossing between 2 points on the map. In reality, it sits inside the Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor, one of Europe's main north-south transport arteries. The European Commission describes that corridor as a crucial axis for the European economy, linking the urban centers and ports of Scandinavia and northern Germany with the industrial regions farther south. And the time savings are not small. Official Fehmarnbelt project facts say the future crossing will take about 7 minutes by train and 10 minutes by car, compared with a 45-minute ferry crossing before waiting and loading time are even counted. The same official material says rail travel between Hamburg and Copenhagen is expected to fall from roughly 5 hours to about 2.5 hours. When a route like that gets cut almost in half, this is not just about comfort for passengers. It changes the math for freight, schedules, and route planning across a much larger region. That matters because trade does not only depend on distance, it depends on reliability. Ferries work, but they come with fixed departures, boarding procedures, weather exposure, and port handling. A fixed road and rail link behaves differently. It turns a sea crossing into something closer to continuous infrastructure, which gives logistics planners a more stable corridor for moving goods between the Nordic countries and Central Europe. The European Commission explicitly says the Fehmarnbelt crossing will remove a cross-border bottleneck on this route, and that rail freight transport time on the corridor will be reduced by about 2 hours. And that is why this tunnel could matter long after the headlines fade. It is not promising to reinvent global trade overnight, but it can make one of Europe's most important corridors tighter, faster, and harder to interrupt. Sometimes that is how trade changes forever. Not with one flashy moment, but when a stubborn gap in the network finally disappears. And once that gap is gone, Europe starts to feel smaller in a very real way. Reshaping distance. What makes the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel so fascinating is that it is not trying to invent a new continent or create some flashy science fiction future. It is doing something quieter and, in some ways, more powerful. It is trying to make Europe feel smaller. Not on a map, but in the way goods move, in the way train schedules tighten, and in the way businesses start treating Northern and Central Europe as a more connected space. The European Commission calls the fixed Fehmarnbelt crossing one of the most important projects in the Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor. That matters because infrastructure changes behavior long before people notice it emotionally. A faster, more reliable corridor can shift where companies route freight, how rail competes with road and sea, and how border regions think about investment and jobs. German officials have described the link as a missing cross-border connection that will bring citizens and businesses closer together in the future, which is exactly how big transport systems often work. First, the route changes, then the economy slowly rearranges itself around the new reality. But megaprojects are never clean, simple stories. They carry engineering risk, cost pressure, political scrutiny, and the constant possibility that one delayed stage can ripple through the entire schedule. In January 2026, Fehmarn AS said the first tunnel element was expected to be immersed in spring 2026, but also stated that delays in immersion made a 2029 opening no longer realistic, with a new overall schedule to be prepared after the first elements are immersed. And maybe that is the most honest way to understand this project. Not as a miracle, and not as a guaranteed triumph, but as Europe forcing a new transport reality into existence one element at a time. Because once a sea crossing becomes fixed infrastructure, distance does not disappear. It changes shape. And when distance changes shape, trade, travel, and even geography start whispering a different future. So the next time a train slips beneath the Baltic, remember, this is more than a tunnel. It is Europe reshaping distance itself. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us below, which megaproject should we explore next?